Good afternoon, Newcastle. It's great to be back. I have spent 3 years up here, so I'm very fond of Newcastle. And actually, I presented at this forum 10 years ago. And I'm embarrassed to say it was exactly the same photo in the brochure as in there now. But of course, I haven't aged at all. I've just put on a bit of weight. And actually, listening to Mimi's thing, it made me think, oh my God, I'm going to come on after this kind of very impressive, slightly exhausting journey around the world. And I'm going to tell you about putting some serious calories on your waist. So maybe we should get together and, do a double act. Or maybe we've got a double act. It should have been me first and her following anyway. So, yes, I've started 4 businesses now. I'm going to talk to you about my entrepreneurial journey, if that's what it is. And I'm going to talk about 3 of the businesses. The first business I can't actually talk about because it was illegal. It was when I was 15 at school, but it was extremely lucrative, and I was almost kicked out for it. But just listening again to Mimi and, I suppose, I'm 4 businesses, that kind of makes you a serial entrepreneur. I mean, in my case, with an S, not a C. But it's exactly the same kind of, I suppose, the same kind of characteristics that gets you through. And, listening to Mimi, it's resilience. Number 1 thing that came through to me was resilience. Number 2 was optimism. And, we have to be, as entrepreneurs, stupidly optimistic. I always, I talk about stuff, talk about ideas all the time, and my wife says, God, that's a rubbish idea, and, I always think, no, it's, you've got to be a glass half full kind of person to be an entrepreneur. And I think the final thing, and again, this came over in spades, is taking action. Because I think we've all got a bit of entrepreneur in us. I like to think that everyone has had a good business idea at some point in their lives, or thought, what about if somebody did this, or what about this for an idea? And I suppose the difference is taking the action and actually doing it. And I'm ashamed to say it took me quite a long time after my illegal kind of hustle, age 14. It took me another 15 years, actually no longer, 20 years, to actually finally take some action and do my own thing. And I think the reason for that is that my father, who was also a bit of a hustler, I have to say it, but he always said, no, James, I want you to become an accountant. I want you to become a chartered accountant. And I just thought, oh my God, I can't think of anything worse than any chartered accountants in the room. Sorry, I might have just committed a cardinal sin of speaking, is offending one's audience. But nothing wrong with chartered accountants, it's just not me. And I went into the food industry, and I spent quite a long time I'm now in the I'm now kind of in the vegan kind of yogurt business. So it was the Antichrist. I was in the dairy business. So, creams, yogurts, desserts, and so on. And I worked for St. Ivel. And my first entrepreneurial journey begins when I was selling a brand called Utterly Butterly in Belgium. And I was sent on this mission to launch Utterly Butterly, and it was just like, it was difficult, I have to say it. There was no butter in Utterly Butterly. The Belgians are very literal people. They kept on saying, well, where's the butter? And I said, no, there isn't any butter, but that's not the point. Anyway, I got absolutely nowhere. I have to say it. I failed completely. on this mission. But I quite like living in Brussels. And although it has a bad reputation, I have to say it, as a place, it's quite a good place to live because there's lots of, it's quite a big expat community, there's lots of good parties, and the food's great. And I used to go to this really good patisserie next to my office, and I was always thinking, what am I going to do next? Because this is going to come to an end very soon. I had a boss in Paris who kept on asking these difficult questions, and I was frankly running out of road. And then I suddenly started thinking, what about, and this patisserie was full of beautiful chocolate desserts. I mean, brownies, soufflés, mousses, parfaits, whatever. And I thought, what about if I wrap this up? This whole thing, not just the taste, but the kind of the sensuousness of it, the look of it, the feel of it, and create a brand around it. I thought that's a much better idea than selling margarine. So that was the genesis of my business. And then I did absolutely nothing with it for 2 years, apart from talk about it. So I'd talk to my wife, my friends, and I'd always say, yeah, I've got this really good business idea. And everyone would say, forget it, it's not going to work. It's the kind of things that, you have these voices in your head saying, yes, do it. No, don't do it. Anyway, 2 years later, I was on a chairlift skiing. And I have a very successful older brother. I don't know if any of you have the same. I mean, I love this. I love Will. He's a great guy. But he was always more successful than me. He was always better at sport. He got a first at Cambridge. He's annoyingly successful. And he has annoyingly successful friends who are slightly intimidating. And I was skiing with these guys, and I was on a chairlift with this guy called Tony, who's now a kind of, he's in the Times top 100. He started a hedge fund. And I knew what he was going to ask me, because he always does every time I see him. He said, so Jim, what are you up to these days? And I thought, oh my God, I can't tell him that I'm kind of flogging margarine and getting nowhere. So I made up my story. I said, you know what, Tony? I have just started a chocolate desserts business. And he said, oh, that sounds interesting. Where are you selling it? I said, well, we've just got it in just a few places at the moment, but we've just got it into Sainsbury's and Waitrose. Oh, that sounds amazing, Jim. I'll have to look out for it. So anyway, I got off the chairlift, and I thought, oh, right, okay, I've got to do something now. I can't just keep on, spinning this lie. So I said, right, I'm going to do it. So I started, creating this brand. And it looks, it looks nice. It looks quite kind of slick, I suppose. But I can tell you, and I've talked to lots of other people who've started their own businesses, especially food businesses, and I imagine a lot of you have the same experience. A lot of these businesses are put together on string. They're built with string. They might look good, but I can tell you, this was really a tough business. But how it happened was that I started playing around. I'm not a cook, but I hired a really good pastry chef who had worked at a top London restaurant called Mosman's. And the thing about chefs in London, and it kind of makes a lot of sense, chefs in top restaurants work really unsociable hours. So just when everyone wants to relax, they've got to go to work. And after 10 years, that becomes quite exhausting. And you kind of think, I can understand. I think I want to do something else. So I met this chef called Katrina, who was an Aussie. And she said, yeah, I'm just fed up with working kind of nights and long hours and stuff, so I'd like to do something a bit different. And I said, okay, well, let's start working together on desserts. So she said, oh, I've got a really good recipe. It's a chocolate souffle, and it's my best, in the restaurant, it's the best-selling dessert. So I said, well, okay, let's have a look at it. And she said, all right, it's got to be in a glass jar. I said, yeah, that sounds right. Love the idea. And she created this product. And it was beautiful, it was lovely. And I said, yes, that's it. I can do something with this. So I had a product. And then I went to a friend of mine who runs a design business. And I said, Perry, try this dessert. I think it's good. And he tried it. And he said, yeah, it's really good, Jim. It's really good, yeah. I said, I need a brand for it. I don't know anything. I know a bit about branding, but I've never created one myself. So can you do that for me? He said, leave it with me. I said, the other thing, Perry, is I don't have any money. It's the story of most entrepreneurs. He said, oh, the minor detail, Anyway, a week later, he phones me and he says, Jim, you've got to come in. You've got to come in. I've got something to show you, and you might not like it. I thought, oh, God, okay, I'll go in. This guy's in Chelsea. And I went into his office, and this picture was up on the wall. And he said, I thought it was a really good idea and really innovative. But then I was looking around, and I found this brand in Sweden. And it apparently launched last year, and it's exactly what you want to do. I kind of looked at this, and I thought, oh, my God, yeah, it looks amazing. God, I can't believe someone's beaten me to it. Oh, my God, I thought that I was onto something, but someone had already got it, and I really liked the brand. And he looked at me. He said, I'm only kidding. This is your brand. I've created it for you. I've created it for you. It's a very good way of selling something to someone. So you create a bit of envy. So I had a brand. And because, although I'm entrepreneurial, I also have to confess I'm slightly indecisive. So when I go to a restaurant, I'm always wrestling. Do I have the fish or do I have the steak and all this kind of stuff? So I went home that evening and I put GU onto my browser. It was, the internet was around at the stage, 2002. And I put GU in and it came up. The first thing that came up was genital urology. I thought, I can't do that. No, I'm going to be the laughing stock of, this is going to be a brand car crash. And I phoned Perry the next day and I said, look, I really liked it, but, I'm not so sure about this brand name. And he said, look, Jim, no one's going to do what you did last night. You're okay. And I never heard of that ever since. I'll be honest with you. So I stuck with it, and then I went to, just as I talked to Tony about, I went to talk to the Sainsbury and Waitrose. And I worked something out because, to be honest, I'd been in Belgium, and I'd been out of the UK for a long time. And so I didn't really have any contacts at these supermarkets. So I had to I had to find some way of getting a meeting. And I found out, and it's still a very good tip, if you want to call a supermarket buyer, the best time to call a supermarket buyer is between 1:30 and 2 o'clock on Tuesday or Wednesday. And the reason for that, and actually the same is true of anybody, because everyone is more receptive after eating. So you want to get people after lunch. And most people in business have a meeting at 2 o'clock. So get them at 1:30 when they're at their, well, maybe not at their desks these days, probably at home doing something, but that is the best time to get hold of someone. So I found this out. I got in front of them and got it listed. If only it was that easy. So it was due for a launch on the 20th of May 2003. So quite a long time ago, 19 years ago now. The problem is, we had a patisserie up in Tottenham, actually, in London, and a guy who's become my friend and my partner, a guy called Motti, was making it at his factory. The only problem is that we didn't actually know how to make it. So although we could make 6 soufflés to present to supermarket buyers, the problem about soufflés, you've got to keep the air in the product. And there's nothing worse than a kind of sunken soufflé, you know. So, and this was a thing that, so it looked really good in the photo. But then when we started making kind of 200 of them, it was a complete disaster. And I only had a week to go before I launched. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a complete disaster. Again, I'm going to be the laughing stock. It's going to be the biggest failure launch for whatever, my kind of negative voice in my head was going off. Anyway, but that doesn't half focus the mind. And literally, and this is the story of my life. I'm a bit of a kind of last minute kind of, somehow it all comes together. And literally, we discovered this kind of magic powder, I call it. And it was a magic powder that you just put into the recipe, and it holds the product. Thank God I discovered, we found it about 2 days before we launched. So then we launched. We could make a soufflé, and we made a couple of other things too. And Goo was born, and I thought, great, yeah, this is going to work. I had one big problem, because it was always problems. The next big problem was the weather, because I was launching in the summer of 2003. The summer of 2003 was quite similar to the summer of 2022. It was hot. It was really, really hot. And it was like, temperatures were broken in that summer, broken again this summer. But I didn't realize this, but no one eats chocolate pudding when the temperature rises above 25 degrees. It's like our diets completely change. I had no idea about this. I assumed that, I thought chocolate pudding, yeah, of course people are going to eat it whenever, I always eat chocolate dessert when I'm given one. I had one just earlier, actually. It was very good. But of course, when the weather is when the temperature is 30 degrees, it's a real problem. So it was a complete failure for the first 3 months, Goo. It was like and I remember the buyers phoning me up and they're saying, look, we love what you've created, James, but I'm afraid we're having to throw away more than we're selling. So we're going to give it another couple of weeks, and then I'm afraid we're going to discontinue it. And it's like, oh my God, Jesus. And I said, look, of course the weather's not going to carry on, the sun's not going to carry on shining at 25 degrees. This is England, for God's sake. And sure enough, in September, the kind of temperature dropped, the rains came, the wind came, the miserable weather came, and that's when I started getting happy. And this was the story of my life for the next 5 years, because I realized that basically a bad weather forecast was fantastic for business. And a great weather was terrible for business. So I became this kind of really annoying person to have around, because I was always kind of, hoping for the cold. Anyway, look, Goo became a great success. Because I think it had this kind of, looks good, makes a promise, keeps a promise. It's the basis of brand loyalty. It's like, looks good, tastes good. Okay, I'm going to buy it again, and I'm going to tell my friends about it. And then, it was before kind of, TikTok and all this Instagram and everything else, but the same kind of jungle telegraph principle of guerrilla marketing applies, which is that good ideas pass on quite quickly. And it became, I have to say it, a great success. So fast forward, I started doing all sorts of chocolate puddings, and but actually I realized that with chocolate dessert, people just like the chocolate one. They don't really want chocolate and raspberry or chocolate and orange, or they just like chocolate. Maybe salted caramel, but it's the basic ones that sell, which is fine. Oh, we did Virgin, so we were on Virgin, and this was my best marketing I ever did. We sold on, well, we didn't sell, it became, you got a little chocolate pot on every Virgin flight. And the great thing about having your brand on a plane is that people, as we all know, are prisoners on planes. So you have to look at this kind of slightly annoying meal tray for an hour or so, and that kind of works its way into your subconscious. So that was a really good bit of marketing. Anyway, so what happens next? So fast forward 6 years. Goo had become, frankly, quite a well-known brand. And, I had a good team, and it was a really nice business, I have to say it. We hit the recession into the last recession, 2009. And I remember thinking, oh my God, we're going into recession. What's going to happen? My business, because Goo was quite expensive. And it was weird, but actually in the last recession, Goo sales went up and I think it's called the lipstick effect. So people tend to kind of you kind of buy more lipstick and you eat more comfort food. And Goo was real comfort food. So we did okay. We survived. But I was quite tired. I'd been on the go for kind of 6 years, and I think my cholesterol levels were about 6.5 at that stage, because we used to sample every day. That was a ritual, the 11 o'clock sampling. I thought, it's time to do something different. So we sold the business, or we put the business up for sale, and it sounds quite a, God, that was a big process in itself. And it took quite a long time, and we had a lot of interest, and we sold to an egg company called Noble Foods. And I remember asking the owner of this egg company, I said, look, you make eggs, we make desserts. What's the link? He said, James, it's my strategy. And I said, what is your strategy? And he said, my strategy is to go beyond egg. I thought, okay, I can help you with that. I thought that was hilarious. Beyond egg as a strategy. Anyway, the reason I think he wanted to go beyond egg is because egg is actually the cheapest form of protein. So in this recession, when we were selling the business in the recession, his sales had just gone massively up, and he just kept on raising his prices, because egg is still, even though it's, he's had a long way to go between egg and chicken or meat or whatever. So he just kept on putting his prices up. And he had a monopoly. He had 75% the egg market. It was quite extraordinary how he got away with it. So he actually had a lot of cash, a lot of money to deploy, and anyway, he really liked goo. So we sold the business, and it was Motti and myself, and we did quite well out of it. But I remember going into the office just after I'd sold it and saying to my guys, I've got some news. Some of them knew already. We've sold the business, and we've got these new guys, Noble Foods, who will come and take over. They were terrified. It was honestly like talking to a funeral. And I remember thinking, God, I mean, various people have done quite well in the business, but I remember thinking, God, this isn't what it should be like. When you sell your business, this should be a day of triumph. And we were quite a peoply business. And so I learned a lesson, which is the next business I'm going to do, everyone is going to celebrate when we sell it, because everyone's going to be a shareholder when we sell the business. Doesn't matter what they do. And I'm glad that I did that, because honestly, when I realized that when I sold goo, I'd sold not just the business, but I'd sold part of me. I'd sold part of my life. And all the, I was very grateful for the money and all of that. But it did create a bit of a vacuum. Because I was quite young. I mean, I don't know how old you think I am, but I'm actually in my mid-50s now. And so I was in my mid-40s. And it's like, in your mid-40s, the worst thing, it's not the worst thing. I can think of many worse things, but it is quite dangerous to have a bit of cash and have quite a lot of time on your hands. And that's the position I found myself in. And the trouble is that your friends all have jobs, so they don't want to, they don't want to meet for lunch every day, and you get bored of going to the gym. I probably should have taken up long distance running or something like that. But anyway, I must admit, I found it quite difficult because I'd gone from working full pelt to actually suddenly not doing that much. So I decided, I came to another kind of a revelation, which is I need to work. It's not just a money thing, it's a sanity thing. I need to work for my, that's what I like doing. I like creating brands, I like creating things. And then I started thinking, I was actually in somewhere hot under a coconut tree, and I started thinking, okay, what am I going to do next? And then, I know it sounds a bit of a cliche, but I started thinking, coconuts, there's something in this. What about if, and I'd always wanted to get into the yogurt business, and I'll tell you why, it's quite simple. The thing about goo, and this is with the possible exception of the lady who came up to me earlier and said, I've got about 2,000 ramekins. What do I do with them? And I said, I'll buy them back from you. I will buy them back from you. And it's funny how a lot of people, when they move house, they take their goo ramekins with them. It's quite extraordinary. These goo ramekins cost 5p a pop. If I can just tell you to just recycle them, that's they're not worth taking. But anyway, so I was thinking, okay, I want to get into, the thing about desserts is that people don't actually eat that many desserts. We've all become more healthy, especially over the last 10 years. So everyone knew of goo, everyone knew the brand name and stuff, but it was one of these brands that people didn't, when you asked them when did they last have it, they'd say, quite a long time ago. And I thought, the next thing I do, I want to get into something that people eat every day. Yogurt. Oh, that's a good idea. And honestly, that's the way my brain works. I'm afraid it's fairly kind of random and obvious. So I thought, I've got to get into yogurt. But yogurt's quite a competitive market. How do I get into yogurt? I thought, coconuts. So I thought, I'm gonna make yogurt from coconut milk. And this was before the plant-based kind of revolution. So it's before people talked about going plant-based, and this was even 5 years ago. You know, vegans were quite a strange bunch of people who you would tend to avoid. And even now, there aren't many vegans around. I mean, I would imagine there are 200 of you in this room. I'd imagine maybe about 6 vegans, just as a matter of interest. Any vegans in the room? Don't be embarrassed. I love vegans. 1 vegan. Okay. 2. That's about right. So most people, if you want to sell this, plant-based yogurt, you need to appeal to more than vegans because there aren't many of them. And this is what I kind of have been learning about over the last 5 years. So anyway, I started playing around with yogurt from coconuts, and it took me, I have to say it took a long time to get it right because it's quite complicated. And we make the yogurt in the same way that you make dairy yogurt. So you basically ferment coconut milk, and the pH goes down and it thickens, and hey presto, you've got yogurt. Again, it's quite difficult to make it. And then I started thinking, and maybe this is just my kind of slightly weird brain, but I was thinking, well, it is strange that we drink cow's milk, and so dairy is such a big part of our diet. And dairy has generally a fairly positive association. You think of nice kind of cows grazing in the field and going in to, be milked and stuff, and it's all natural and positive and so on. But the reality is a little bit different. I don't know if any of you have been into dairies, but they're quite smelly. And cows are kind of herded in. And I'll tell you now, I'm not a kind of anti-cow at all, because my first business was built on, lots of cream. But it got me thinking about, the future and where the world's going, and I kind of felt, this feels like the right direction. Coconut milk is completely natural. We're never going to run out of it. It's naturally organic, so there's no fertilizers used in coconut production. And just as a matter of interest, coconuts grow all coconuts grow within about 100 miles of the sea. So you need a coastline for coconuts. And the 3 countries that produce the most are Indonesia, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. And that's where I buy my coconut cream. But it felt like a very natural thing to do. So again, I started, similar story to Goo. I kind of played around with the product. I've got a delicious natural yogurt, which is very clean, very dairy-like, but not a cow in sight. Okay, no cows involved. So, and that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And I will now show you my ad, which is introducing my friend.
Yes. Ooh. Delicious and creamy dairy-free natural yogurt. Made from 95% coconut and live cultures. It's more tempting than temptation itself. The Coconut Collaborative, free from dairy, but not temptation.
There you go. If you haven't tried it, try it. You can buy it in all supermarkets. It's delicious. And it's quite interesting. You'll notice that my friend there has a fig leaf over him. And when I launched the brand, there were no fig leaves. There were bits. And I started getting lots of complaints. I said, we like your brand, but can you cover him up? So I decided to cover him up. And I covered Eve up as well. I call them Adam and Eve. But yeah, very natural, very tasty. And I feel kind of this is where the world is heading. So maybe, as I say, more natural than milking a cow, milking a coconut. It's kind of nature's bounty. And the great thing about coconut trees is they absorb carbon and they breathe out oxygen, which is the reverse of what dairy cows do. So that's my third business, Coconut Collab, and we've built it up. We're now selling it in all over the UK. It's quite a big business. It's almost as big as Goo was. And the great thing about it is that it's probably not, well, it's certainly not as well known as Goo, but amongst the people who buy it, because it's yogurt, they buy it every week. So it becomes a bit of a ritual, a bit of a staple, and that's, very interesting from a business point of view. My final business, because I am slightly addicted to creating brands, is almost back to Goo. But it's a plant-based version of Goo. And you won't have seen this brand because it sells in America. And it's called Bondeville, which is basically Goo, but plant-based. So it's kind of, it's basically the devil without the bad, if you like, because it's plant-based. And that sells, all over America, and it's a nice little business, and it's kind of, as I say, maybe this will be a Goo one day. So that's my fourth business, and again, I love all my kids. I love my kids, and I love my brands, and in some ways, they've all got a big place in my life. And I realized, and again, listening to Mimi, I kind of pick up the same things. We're slightly addicted to what we do. We love it. It's a big part of our life. And I must admit, I have really enjoyed building brands, and I've discovered that is a big part of my life. Thank you very much.